With any growing trend in anime, you typically will see some sort of variant that will kind of keep cropping up, a growing popularity around some sort of subgenre within it. And obviously, isekai is no different matter. With isekais and its growing trend, we see certain subgenres pop up, including the otome game. But like anything that's overly popular and, let's face it, oversaturated, I typically look at it with a lens of what is this doing different? What sets this aside from any other otome game? That's what I'm going to get into with my review of I'm the Villainess, So I'm Taming the Final Boss, a 12-episode series that aired in the fall 2022 anime season, so let's jump right into it. I'm the Villainess opens up in a ballroom where Eileen, the main character, has just been told by the prince that he is breaking up their engagement. And everybody's obviously shocked. The prince has decided that he wants to break up with this mean, nasty Villainess to pursue the beautiful and very kind Lilia. Yes, your typical otome game trope. Now, the interesting thing that happens is that Eileen immediately recalls memories of her past life. These memories that she believed were just dreams, suddenly she realized, no, these are actually memories of my past self. Yes, her past self that was in our modern times Japan under some unknown illness that the doctors couldn't cure. And these images that we get is of her sitting in this bed in a hospital constantly playing a video game. Yes, this exact otome game. She realized at this point that she is the villainess of the video game that she played so much. And so obviously she knows things are going to go downhill from here. In the game itself, the prince rejects the villainess, falls in love with the main character, and eventually this demon lord will show up in the form of a dragon and crush Eileen, the villainess. So she realized at this point, I need to fix something because I'm about to die. So her way to get around this flag is to go to the demon lord and make him fall in love with her. Again, tame the final boss. So she immediately bows before the prince, says she's always loved him, and walks away. And then immediately heads over to the demon lord's castle, where she basically proposes to the demon lord, let's get married. Which he doesn't take too well. Immediately out of just shock, he just lets down this lightning bolt because his emotions control the weather. And when she wakes up, she's before the demon lord, in which she proposes once again, let's get married. And he's like, wait, do you love me? She's like, no, I don't love you, but it'll be mutually beneficial between the two of us, so let's get married. To which he immediately teleports her away. And what kind of follows this whole thing is you have Eileen herself constantly pursuing the demon lord, and the demon lord at the same time not understanding what love is, keeps pushing her away. But slowly over time, you see the two of them sort of having to work together in order to help certain circumstances around themselves and eventually see what's great about the two of them. Claude enjoys Eileen's perseverance, charisma, and yes, her desire to allow the coexistence between the demons and the humans. At the same time, Eileen understands the coexistence with the demon kind is an important thing to the demon lord. And obviously, Eileen's not going to be left to her devices, as you have a lot of people around them that are pulling strings in order to prevent them from coming together. Yes, even the prince himself suddenly becomes jealous of Eileen because suddenly he realizes what he lost. And even have the heroine herself who, obviously seeing the good in what she's doing, the good nature of herself, trying to fix the situation in her own way. It sort of gets in that whole realm where the otome game kind of plays out this way, and so the moment that she kind of veered off that course, it sort of messed with things. So nothing really is as it should be because it's no longer the game she once played. The villainess in her game never went to the demon lord. She just got crushed by him. So my thoughts on I'm the Villainess, So I'm Taming the Final Boss. I'm seriously very mixed on this show. There's certain aspects of it that I really do enjoy, while other aspects didn't play out as well as I wanted to. One main key issue the series has overall is that its pacing is really off. There's points where it just feels like it's just jumping forward in time. Characters suddenly feel like they're closer to each other than they really should be, and it seems like it's trying to push itself through 3 major arcs just to get through the content. In the end, the series has pretty much 3 major arcs, and it really does feel like the animators, or at least the producers, were really wanting it to get to this one pinnacle point in that 3rd arc in order to have a really nice wrapped up story, which I do appreciate. But at the same time, it's one of those ones where you go, this should have been 24. Like, this literally should have been 24 or just been 2 seasons and have a break. Because again, it feels very, very jarring how much things kind of progress over time. After the first arc is kind of completed, it really does feel like suddenly Eileen and Claude are just all over each other and it doesn't make much sense. But it makes sense in the idea that if they're trying to get through these 3 story arcs, they sort of have to. And it doesn't help the fact that the second arc just felt so blah. And again, I think part of that issue is that they were trying to rush through the content so fast that all the characters they were introducing in the second arc, I didn't care about them. I don't know who they are. And when they show up later on, I'm like, who is this guy? Oh, I guess that was from the second arc. Again, pacing is this anime's weakest link. Outside of that, I really did enjoy Eileen as a character. I think she's fantastic. And again, like I said earlier, I think the thing that kind of helps this stand aside from what your typical Otome games do is mainly around Eileen. The circumstances that she was placed into is that she's at the point in which the flags start to happen. Unlike one of the earlier Otome game type stories, My Next Life as a Villainess, where she pretty much knew really early in her life. So she was able to sort of form bonds long before the Otome game actually began. So without that benefit, Eileen's sort of in the fray, and she's having to act very quickly. And I think a lot of her cunning and charming nature really does come into play with that. And yes, Rie Takahashi voicing her pulled that off so well. Eileen is such a bundle of fun. She's a likable character, she's cunning, she's conniving, she gets a little dark every now and then. She just has a really fun and great personality that you just want to see what she does. Which again, I think, despite my issues with the pacing, works really well with the Demon Lord Claude. Claude is almost disjointed from emotion. He's very stern, he's very quiet, he's very monotone. And then he's being presented by somebody that's very loud and very pushy, and he doesn't know how to react to it. He doesn't understand love and this lady being all over at him. He doesn't understand what to do with it. And even in his own dark nature as a Demon Lord, sort of tries to push this idea of a desire for himself to break her. And yes, that could be taken very wrong, but it's not a terrible thing. He sees her as unbreakable. He sees her as confident. And so the only thing that he hasn't seen yet is her vulnerable. And so this is kind of this twisted attitude that he gets of this desire to see her cry. And it really kind of adds to their duo. It's a really interesting kind of mechanic to their relationship. I enjoyed seeing the two of them together because again, they sort of see the same value to something. Where again, yes, Eileen is very selfish and she desires to not die. In the end, she's a good person, and she understands what's important to the love interest that she's seeking out. Coexistence is important, and as things progress, she's sort of seeing the value to the demons themselves, befriending them really quickly. Yes, Almond. Almond is great. And so she desires, just like Claude, to protect them. So you can say a lot of the mutual nature that they have ends up coming from them just being together, even if the initial contact was forced. The other characters around Eileen and Claude were decent. I got a huge kick early on with how screwed up Cedric is, which is the prince. How angry he gets at the idea that Claude, which there is a bond between Cedric and Claude, the idea that Eileen would go to Claude. It upsets him, it frustrates him to the point where he gets obsessed. And I love that kind of twisting of it. It plays into one of the strong suits the series has that I found really entertaining in another series, Life is Tough for Mobs. Entrapped in an Otome game, Life is Tough for Mobs, there was an element to that series that the moment that he started doing things that were outside of the norm of the story itself, it sort of breaks things. Like I said earlier, Eileen in the game doesn't go to the Demon Lord. So obviously her going to the Demon Lord is going to break things in the storyline. Things aren't going to quite play out the same way. And yes, it's getting around the flags, but at the same time, it's messing with the characters. Again, Cedric getting obsessed with Eileen and upset the idea that she went to Claude. Again, having technically the main character of the Otome game, Lilia, suddenly doing things that she's supposed to do in the game, and it messing with what Eileen's doing with Claude. You would think that she wouldn't care. Just go to the wayside. The Demon Lord's no longer a threat, but she's still acting out what she's supposed to be doing. And yes, that gets a little bit more weirder later on, but we're not going to get into that with this review. I love when stories break characters. I love the idea of the villainess not being the evil bad guy that the games would typically make you to believe. Understanding why Eileen's the way she is, the fact that technically her past self in this world dedicated her whole life to this prince just to be discarded, those things are really interesting. I love breaking the Otome game mold. But getting back to the characters as a whole, I have to admit that despite that, a lot of the side characters are sort of just kind of being thrown in. Beyond the initial cast, any side characters felt very so much like they just threw them in there just to have more characters to push a story along. Again, the second arc just felt very flat. And this kind of carries on to the final arc where it just felt like a lot of the villains that were surrounding Eileen and Claude and all the other characters just didn't feel all that interesting. The initial story arc was great, but everything beyond then, all the villains they sort of introduce, I didn't care. I really didn't care. And especially the final villain character at the very end of the series, I'm just like, I don't care anymore. I really don't. Again, it all kind of comes down to pacing, I think. Too many characters, too many plot lines, too many villains, that it ultimately in the end just kind of falls apart over time. Visually, it was okay. I didn't really expect too much from a rom-com type story like this. Honestly, there was a time, especially later on, where it just felt like It's existing. It's doing something, I guess. It doesn't look terrible, but the characters kind of look off. But again, it was enough to make it enjoyable. With all that said, though, overall, I did enjoy this series, and I think it was an interesting twist on the whole Otome game thing. I will just say, though, I just felt like it was just not really well adapted with the pacing and the layout of the story arcs themselves. Like I said before, really rushing through things and sort of removing a lot of the flavor that I enjoyed this series. The main core thing that I did enjoy was the earlier segments of the series. I love the setup and everything. I love the story between Eileen and Claude. I honestly, it's to the point where I just want to say, watch the first 4 episodes, get that first story arc, and then just stop watching it, because it feels very complete. I still, in the end, enjoy Eileen, and I love the chemistry with Claude. But it's sort of one of those series that, even though they introduced an interesting concept in order to kind of extend the Otome game story, it doesn't really work. Typically with a lot of these Otome games, it's all about avoiding flags, but what you kind of see very quickly is, once the flags are gone, what do you have? It was sort of my issue that I had with My Next Life as a Villainess. Once you got past the flags, it's like, well, then what are we even doing here anymore? This one sort of introduced a way to keep that coming into the storyline, but again, I think the pacing ruined it. Still, in the end, I highly recommend it just for Almond. But no, that's my thoughts in my review of I'm the Villainess, so I'm Taming the Final Boss. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. As always, if you did, make sure to hit that like button down below, comment. Let me know what you thought of this series if you're going to be checking it out. Additionally, if you have not already, make sure that subscribe button so you get all my content. I do news, reviews, first impressions, top list. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Additionally, if you want to support the channel more, we have a Patreon link, a tips link, and a super thanks button down below. I greatly appreciate it, but it does. And y'all take care.